Let's start out actually with Justin, if you don't mind. Let's begin with answering the questions that came up that I think were really interesting questions relating specific to licensing. Can we begin there?
Happy to. So one of the questions was, how many licenses do you need to be a contractor? So I'll give you sort of a trick answer. So everyone who spoke in the last session has one license, but they may have multiple classifications, and that's that A, that B, and there's many others. So you would obtain one license with a contractors board, but you could get many classifications. I think Mary may take the cake. I think the classifications for Teichert construction are many. And for each of those classifications, one person could serve as the quote unquote qualifier. That's the person with 4 years experience, either as a journeyman, supervising employee, foreman, or contractor from another area. But each of those qualifiers could actually hold a few classifications, all of the classifications, or you could have many qualifiers on a license. So a bit of a complicated answer, but for any specifics, I'm happy to stay on after and I can talk about anyone's particular situation. And then the second question was very similar, which is, can you hold a Class A and a Class B at the same time? And the answer is yes. We would be looking at 4 years experience, probably in 2 different areas, but there is a lot of overlap. So it'll really depend on your particular circumstances, but we do look at that and someone can hold an A and a B at the same time. And then the last comment I would make for studying for the exam, I would say if you are a reader, the first 80 pages of our law and reference book, which I'll provide a link for later, is a great resource, and that may be all you need. If you're a visual person or an audio person, my father was very much an audio person. He had to take the law and business 3 times before he passed, and he's okay with me sharing that. He actually did get into one of the programs so he could have those audio tapes, and he just listened to them on his commute for about 3 weeks, and then it really sunk in. So that's it for the questions.
One thing I wanted to add, and I don't know if this was in the question or not, but this issue of how many licenses do you need to have? One thing is we have these remarkably qualified people that we're lucky enough to have on the panels tonight, but also not to feel overwhelmed, because not everybody has all those classifications either. So that's one thing I like about how friendly and approachable the state license board is. So if you feel like you want to get a license, but you don't want 5 of them, I think Justin and team can help out with that as well. So starting out with some of the questions for this panel, the first one to talk a little bit about is, what are the benefits to having a license from your perspective? And obviously this was folks who are helping support the process of getting a license, and also overseeing and reinforcing why you need to be a licensed contractor from a legal standpoint. So what would your perspective be on the benefits of a license? And I guess maybe we could start with Nancy, because I know with enforcement from so many different agencies, you've seen a lot of different things.
Sure. So what I would say is the benefit of having the license is that, you know, you're protecting that consumer and you're protecting yourself. Having the license, I think it was spoken earlier too, that you get assistance from CSLB free of charge if you have some issues with the homeowner. The benefit also is if you have to mediate some issues or some concerns with the contract that you had with them, then they'll be able to help and work with you. And that's a good bonus sometimes, because sometimes it's miscommunication and you can bring those other individuals in and keep it all above board. Another benefit is that, you know, when you have a license, you can get paid, because if you're unlicensed and it gets out there that you're not licensed, you can't sue the homeowner. And most likely you're not going to be able to receive the pay if they're not paying you for the job or the work that you did. The other benefit is that you get to build respectability within our industry. So you get people with licenses, they do quality work out there, they get a reputation, and you build that, and then you get more jobs on that, as well as you build a network with architects and engineers, with other contractors, and with us, the building officials, the building inspectors. We're not allowed to refer people, but when we see good work, we mention it. We say, wow, this is great work, quality work, as we're out there inspecting it, as we're reviewing plans with people. And so you have that benefit of building up a respectability within your community and with the customers and the consumers. So those are some real good benefits of maintaining that license. And then I would just add one last thing, and that is, when you have the license, you get that network that's built, and you learn about the codes and the way that you get that proper training that you need two, you know, support your future. And license is the best way to go. And we respect that and we appreciate that, as well as the consumer appreciates that.
So thank you very much. Shauna or Justin, do you have additional thoughts in addition to what Nancy just shared about the benefits of getting a license?
Shauna, I think you're muted.
Who?
Shauna, we're still on mute.
Okay. I think Nancy said it best. So if you go one day without a license in California, you risk the one thing I hear all the time is my license went suspended for one day because I didn't have workers' comp, or I didn't have liability coverage, or my license went expired for one day. You risk losing all of the money that your whole entire contract, even if it's been going on for 3 years. Like, I'm sure, Mary, you have contracts going on for like 2 years. You can lose all of that based on your license going suspended, expired, or not okay for one day. So that's the benefit of being licensed.
Cool, thank you. Justin, anything to add?
I would say I'll sort of I'll throw a little fire and brimstone in, and then a good news at the end, which is part of an entire unit of CSLB is looking at unlicensed activity every day. And I do not want you to have to ever meet those people. But on the off chance that you do come across them and you do have that uncomfortable conversation, they will refer you to me, and we will get you licensed. So whatever the consequences are because you got caught, some of you may be on this webinar because of that. That's okay. Be honest with me. Let me know what you've been doing the last few years. It's okay if it was under the table. That's not part of the evaluation process. We are just looking to make sure you have the experience. So there's a plus and minus to that. But if you haven't met them yet, I just don't want you to ever have to.
Well, thank you for that. And then Nancy, I think you also had some thoughts on what are some of the consequences if you don't have one, to the fire and brimstone point Justin made. Do you want to share some of those thoughts?
Yeah, and I would say that we work well. The building departments work very well with CSLB. And so when you're out there and you don't have that license, we're going to be turning you in because you have to have that license. Also, you become responsible for what is happening there. I mean, and it could be life or death sometimes in some cases, because you might not be doing something the proper way. And believe me, you'll be dealing with the law when it comes to that. It's not worth it to not have the license in that case.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. I would just add, at Teichert, we definitely think of license number 8 as one of our most precious assets. So forget about all those plants and pieces of equipment. That's been a real important asset. So let's talk a little bit about when's the right time to get your license. So I guess, Justin, you sort of launched the topic a little bit with the experience question. You want to speak first to when's the right time to do this?
Sure. I would say that the number one thing that is an issue for most applicants would be whether or not they have 4 years experience. Now, for the most part, that's 4 years experience in the last 10 years, but there are quite a few exceptions to that. And I can get into that just talking with people's personal circumstances later. But that can be in a variety of roles, and that's really the critical thing. What we're looking for is essentially a journey person or greater as far as your role. So you wouldn't necessarily be an apprentice, though some apprenticeship programs certainly do count towards your experience requirement. But we would be looking for someone who has been a journey person, someone who's been in a management role or a supervisory role. And then there's quite a few exceptions with those who are working out of state, who may not be a licensed contractor out of state, but may have garnered experience working on federal projects or out of state projects that also would count. I know a lot of people sort of forget some of their military experience. There's quite a few people in the Navy and the Army who have actually quite a lot of contracting experience and never give themselves credit for. And then also we do look at your education. So any education you completed or apprenticeship programs you completed, it's very case by case. But we also evaluate that. And for education, you can get a maximum of 2 years to the 4-year requirement.
There we go. Shauna, it sounds like you've had some experience with helping folks through that application process. Do you have some additional thoughts on how people think about whether it's the time?
I completely agree. The very first step would be making sure that you have the experience. That's the main hurdle of getting through the licensing process, is showing your experience. And if you don't word your experience the correct way, then it gets red flagged, and you have to go through a bunch of back and forth with the CSLB. So the main hurdle is the experience.
Are there any
So
kind of
1 year of hands-on experience is what they like to see, and then 3 years can be supervisory or education or anything else they're happy with. But yeah, that's the main hurdle.
And I'm sorry, I don't mean to contradict Shauna. Shauna absolutely was correct up until about 3 years ago. So hands-on is not required. We certainly look at it, but you could have 0 years hands-on experience. There's
okay.
plenty of other parts of the contracting business we do evaluate. But yeah, sorry, it's a good point to make. So I just want to make sure everyone knew.
Justin, you raised the interesting point about the military as well. I'm wondering, what's the goal? Like, if people were to say, here's the overall thing that you're hoping to have in the licensed contractor community, what is it that you're kind of stepping back and assessing from across all these experiences?
I think, especially with our experienced analysts, so when you have a really tricky case, it goes up to a bit of a higher level so that people can really look at it and it thoroughly. They have a really good sense of whether you have it or not. And I would say, if you're getting close, if you're at 3.5 years, I would definitely come have a conversation with me, and I'll provide my contact information. But we should definitely talk about your particular situation. I'm happy to assist you. But I would say, if you're under 2 years, I think a good thing for you to do as you continue to build your career would be to gather documentation. It's just usually helpful in the application process. So, if you're, hang on to bids. If you're working with permitting offices like Nancy, certainly hang on to that paperwork. You may not need it when it comes to the application process, but I'd rather you have it and not need it than if we have additional questions, you wouldn't have it. And we are really getting away from documentation, but at sometimes it's just really helpful, and it makes the analysis easier if you have it. But we can find other ways to look at your experience. I think a classic example I try to give everyone is a lot of painters who are working under the table may be dealing in cash. Most likely they've got a Sherwin-Williams guy that they're seeing, every month, and they've got massive work orders. We certainly look at things like that. So just sort of keep that in mind as you're starting to build your experience.
I remember Amber had mentioned in the previous panel too, the benefits of staying in touch with previous employers and contacts as you go along. And that was one of the questions, is what sort of records folks should be keeping, which it sounds like you've kind of alluded to with the orders and so forth. Are there any other thoughts on either what are some common issues or mistakes that happen in the course of the application process? The things people might want to see as they go through this?
The only other thing that I see quite often is like the structure of your entity. If you're a corporation or an LLC, if it doesn't match up with what you have on file with the Secretary of State, that's like a major cause for rejection, and it can cause issues. And if you have people and the fingerprinting's an issue, if you have people coming from out of state, or if they live out of state and not willing to come to California to get fingerprinted, it just adds time to the process. So it's just a timing thing. Other than that, I would just say, like, keeping your license active, which I think somebody suggested. Always keep your license active and give the CSLB enough time to process anything that you have to give to them, whether it's your insurance, renewal, whatever. They need time to process it, and you just don't want your license to expire or suspend or whatever.
Mary, I'd just add, I think it was brought up maybe by Amber or Cindy or somebody earlier. I think it's kind of important that you, as you're working out there in the field and you're gaining this experience, to stay in touch with these people like they were saying, but also if you haven't worked with somebody, connect up with individuals. There's so much on social media and Facebook, and you can join these different groups and you can find people in your local area and all the different sponsors you have here. Reach out and you can talk to the different ladies and the different gentlemen that have their license, and take some time to just spend a few minutes with them to say, how did you gain your experience? And how did you go about getting that experience? And then how did you maintain your history for documentation? It's very similar to what I did with as being a building official and a building inspector. I just reached out to people who are already doing it and said, well, how'd you do that? And how'd you learn this? And how did you maintain that? And who do I go talk to? Because sometimes you'll get different responses and different means in different ways. And then while you're doing that, you're building up not network with these group of individuals that you can reach out to and you can speak with, and you're building this great community here. And like Mary said, this is like one of the career paths where you get paid equally. We get paid like just like the men do, and I hate to say it like that, but it's big, and we can make good money in this, and we can respect what we're doing. And it's a really good career path. And if you really want to get that experience and you want to know what to do, it's always good to talk to somebody who has it and see how they did it. And it might not fit with this individual, but then another individual might give you something that's more up the path that you're taking. So good to do.
I agree with that as well. I'm not a contractor, completely agree with it, but I don't want to discourage anyone from applying for a license if they don't have that path to take, if they don't want to go to their former employer. Still apply. All you need is somebody that has firsthand knowledge of your work experience. It doesn't have to be an employer. It doesn't have to be a contractor. It doesn't have to be any of that. Just somebody with firsthand knowledge of your work experience can certify you. So just throwing it out there. Don't want to discourage anyone from applying for a license.
Well, I appreciate that. I think one of the things too that's really that's kind of been highlighted on this panel as well as the last one is that this is really a community of contractors. So everybody kind of mentioned having folks that you can reach out to or model after. One of our sponsors tonight's United Contractors, and that really is an industry association of contractors. So there's a lot of places in the world to get connected to other folks, what kind of work you want to do, whether there's questions or even just someone to kind of share stories with, because every once in a while that's helpful as well. One of the questions that we had talked a little bit about was getting, if there's any thoughts folks have on actually taking the test. So I don't know if preparing for the test or taking the test, if you have any words of wisdom on, you know, common issues that come up or things you would suggest for folks.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt everyone. I think what I'll recommend is I'm actually going to send a link to everyone. Every month, CSLB does something much more extended from what I'm about to do. I'm about to just spend about 10 to 15 minutes on our application process. But our next meeting on May 7th at 10 a.m., we spend 2 hours once a month going in sort of gross detail about the application process and some do's and don'ts. And there's a link where you could register for the next one, which will be on May 7th. Yeah, if certainly I'll stay on for anyone who wants to talk after this wraps up. But if not, I'm also going to provide my contact information. We can always follow up after the meeting.
Probably one takeaway I hope everybody on this has is that the CSLB has a lot of really approachable people that are really trying to make this work for folks who have this experience and want to get into this line of work. So you know, there's some links that have been provided in the chat, and Justin, I appreciate your willingness to kind of stay around and answer questions too, but I'm hoping that folks on this call, you know, I saw the note in the chat about this can feel overwhelming. There's certainly a lot to it, but also there's a lot of like very helpful folks that want to assist and support. So I see that Justin just put his phone number and email address in the chat. So please do think about reaching out also if you've got particular things to say. And Justin does have some more material that we can kind of talk through, but before we do that, to Shauna and Nancy, do you have any kind of further ideas or thoughts that you'd like to make sure to share with the folks tonight on either the benefits, drawbacks of not having a license, benefits of getting one, challenges or things you think people could benefit from knowing?
I would just add that not having the license it's very detrimental. You know, you get fees, you can end up in jail. It's just not worth it. And you want to do some fair bidding out there. You know, if you go underground economy like that, you make it harder for everybody else, and then it's just not good for the consumer. So do yourself a favor, get the license, get the help with CSLB, network out. We're here to help you. We're all here. This is like really important, and we know you can do it. So just know that, and work well with your building departments. We're here. We're here for you to help you.
I am too, so you can call me if you need.
There you go.
So thank you very much for those perspectives. I think, Justin, if I can turn it over to you, it looks like we have some particular questions on preparing for the test and doing some of the work. So we have about 15 minutes left of this event, which I think we could either go through your presentation or we could address these specific questions.
I'll start with the questions and then I'll go to the presentation. But if anyone has questions, I'll sort of pause. If I don't get to the end of it again, there is the next presentation where we go into nauseating detail. I apologize. On these details would be May 7th at 10 a.m. and there is a link in the chat. But I do want to thank Mary. Hopefully she needs to take a drink of water. She's been, but very much appreciate you moderating both panels. Thank you so much, Mary.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. I think this topic's a really cool one. So, and if anyone that's participating this evening has ideas on either things that would be interesting to see, questions you have, hurdles that we can overcome, ways that we can make this feel better and more approachable for more excellent people that want to get into contracting, that is our goal. So thank you. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Justin to kind of finish her off.
Thank you. So the first question I see, actually I'll need to scroll up, my apologies, is from Lisa. Can a structural steel and B licensed contractor perform structural steel work for bridges? I would say 9 times out of 10, it's very unlikely. You would probably need an A classification. There are some bridges out there, and I really would underline the word some, but with most exceptions, you would need a general engineering contractor license, because anything that sort of requires specialized engineering and knowledge, you need that classification to do that work. There are some minor things when you're talking about something on a property where you're not going between properties. There are some limited exceptions, but I would say to contact our classifications deputy or me for that specific project. But the vast majority of the time, you would need an A classification to perform that work. How much, Michelle asks, how much time can we expect to prepare for the test? I wish I had an answer to that question. I also am from a family of teachers, and I would say it depends on the student. I think you'll sort of have to make a self-assessment. I would say it usually requires more time to do the law and business exam for most people to study. And the trade, for those who've been in the work, especially for quite some time, those they don't seem to struggle nearly as much. It's the law and business that you sort of have to get familiar with some of the nuances of finance and things that may not come naturally to some folks. So I would say, again, if you're a reader, to look at the law and reference book, and that's available on our publications page on the CSLB website. If you're not a reader, then you certainly may want to look at one of these programs. As a CSLB employee, I can't recommend any particular one, but they are available out there. And I would just use your best judgment when you're evaluating those programs. But I've known people who studied the night before and passed, and I know people who needed to take a couple solid months to get ready. I think it really just depends.